Hello and welcome to another episode in our mini-series from the Developing Practice podcast. This series is all about hybrid practice, whether that be leading hybrid teams, developing hybrid teaching, or working in a hybrid manner. We have spoken with lots of guests over the last couple of years and have extracted snippets of conversations for this series. Today's compilation is all about ensuring equality, diversity and inclusion in a hybrid environment. We hope you enjoy. It's interesting, you touched on equality and diversity in your response there. Do you think that these changes to our ways of working have affected staff equally? Or do you see the differing impacts in different areas and for particular groups of staff?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is such an important question, and it's one that we're looking at in the university through a number of different avenues, not least the RISE project, which colleagues might have heard about, which we'll talk more about in the coming weeks. But if we take a step back first and then perhaps get to the question, I think there's an interesting sort of lead into it. So from what we've discussed already, it's clear that what we are all experiencing is a fundamental shift in what we might define as the normative practices, the routines, the activities, the expectations and assumptions about our professional lives. So the norms that we took for granted even back in March this year have been disrupted and disturbed by what was an unforeseen set of circumstances. And it's true to say that much of what we thought we knew is now questioned and uncertain, and that's understandably really uncomfortable for many of us, myself included. So I think we're confronted by what we might define or view as a wild set of practices and technologies that we previously not part of our working lives. And what we're trying to do now is domesticate those untamed forces and ways of working so that they work for us. So we're trying to naturalize these new hybrid forms of practice and create new norms associated with our roles and our functions and our professional identities. But it's really important that we recognize that the impact of COVID, as you say in your question, will differ between individuals and teams, and because their norms differed, their lived experience and professional experience differed. So we can't work on the basis that of everyone being affected in the same way, or assume that everyone has experienced the changes equally and has been able to respond in uniform and planned ways. Real working life is far more complicated and messier than that, isn't it? So I'd argue that, and I have argued elsewhere, that COVID has provided a lens through which we can more clearly see existing inequalities, how they've been exacerbated in the current situation, such as, the time that one has available, the multiple responsibilities that are placed on individuals according to who they are and their lived reality. But it also provides a lever that we can use to try and address some of these issues. So I think it's really important that all of us think carefully about the practices that we put in place to actively monitor and address the differentiated impact that new hybrid ways of working may have on our diverse colleagues, and therefore allow us to give extra support and help and understanding where it's needed. So I think we have a responsibility to ask ourselves how colleagues from different backgrounds, perhaps with different characteristics, may be experiencing the changes initiated by the pandemic in different ways, and ensure that we're able to respond as required. Just to add to that, I think also, how do we build in this new way of working those smaller but critical aspects of a healthy working culture, of a positive working culture, checking in with colleagues, giving support, being aware of issues of, say, isolation or overload? Are we up to date as individuals with the resources and services available to support good mental health? Are we giving our teams and colleagues the time they need to adjust and to develop these new ways of working? We should ask ourselves, what strategies are we using to manage our own well-being and keep a close eye on workload balance? That's a real issue for many of us when working from home, and that's one of the areas where people are affected differently depending upon their lived experience. So I think increasingly colleagues are working non-core hours, for instance, due to childcare demands, or just preference now that's an option. Have we adjusted our expectations and approaches to take account of those kinds of changes? So I think I've set up a number of questions there, but I think we need to be in a position to answer those questions positively if we're going to create a positive working culture that does acknowledge this differentiated impact that COVID has had.
In a recent podcast, we had a discussion with David Pastor, the CEO of Clare House, and he said something really interesting that struck a chord with me. And it was that we are all in the storm at the moment, but some of us are in different boats. And that got us thinking about the equality and diversity aspects of what people are finding throughout this pandemic. So do you have any reflections on the hybrid model from your experience for our disabled colleagues?
Is just that you really need to have the very sensitive conversations with those individuals and work out what is right for them in that situation, because I don't think there is a one size fits all. I think each individual set of circumstances will be different according to the nature of the person, the person, their personality, their preferences, the way they work, the role they do. Is it something that, requires them to be out and about traveling, or is it something that is more sort of desk based? And I think the nature of the disability. So I think it's always about that conversation, that it's about sitting down with them going, what do you need to help you work at your best and be your best in this situation? And sometimes it can be, from my experience in this particular situation, sometimes it can be really, really small sort of practical adjustments. Needn't necessarily be big changes to working hours or anything like that, although it might be. But I think it's just about having that conversation with the individual, and the line manager, which it probably would be in the vast majority of cases, having the confidence and the sensitivity to be able to have a really good conversation, because ultimately what we're about is about helping that individual to be able to work at their best and make their best contribution given the circumstances. And how do we facilitate that?
And I guess along those lines as well, I was talking to a disabled colleague, and they were saying that they don't want to return to campus, that actually it's worked really, really well with them being at home. So I guess the same applies in that, having that conversation again with their line manager of, this has worked really well for me. My output in terms of my work hasn't reduced, and trying to have that open conversation around maybe having some kind of hybrid model rather than just the thought that they will go full time back onto campus as well. Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it is absolutely about having that conversation. And I think if we have established, and I don't know if we have, but I think we have, if we've established that actually you can trust people to behave like, professional adults, which we all are. We all manage all sorts of things in our life, don't we? Every day, all sorts of challenges and delights. If we accept that premise that we're all responsible professional adults, we have an open conversation about what's needed and what's going to work best in that situation. And so, sometimes, there may need to be some middle ground. But it's about having the conversation and having it with a genuine, honest intent, I think, to get the best outcome all around.
So do you think there'll be a move towards kind of managers managing by outcomes rather than presenteeism, in terms of what you're talking about with trusting staff?
I do think that, yeah, very definitely. And I think it's started to happen. And I think I'm hoping that it's kind of released that pent up tension, if you like, that a lot of managers and maybe some organizations had around this type of working. I hope we will all see the benefits much more holistic benefits for everyone working in this way. I definitely think there'll be a big move more explicitly towards managing by outcomes. And that will be a bigger shift for some organizations than others. But yeah, I definitely do think that, and I really welcome it as well. I think it's in everyone's interests if we can do that. Who knows what we might end up being able to do.
I want to pick up on what Claire said, about the conferences and the face-to-face and the hybrid, because I think one interesting thing with these events, particularly with not so much the hybrid, but the move to virtual, is that democratizing in terms of participation. Suddenly some of the barriers around time and distance start coming down quite a bit. It's not to say that other barriers don't come up, like a digital divide barrier, because of course you need to have good internet access. I think we're probably all familiar with that horrible flickering that happens when you realize somebody in the rest of the house has started streaming something. So I think other things come up, but it does really open up participation, maybe to people who just wouldn't have had that opportunity to take part in these types of events and these types of conversations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, I mean, there's some real positives there, isn't there, around this type of working and mitigating that use of travel. Has there been any other positives that have been observed during the pandemic with regards to international collaboration?
So I think, just following on what Billy was saying, because I was wanting to raise this anyway, I think definitely kind of accessibility, that although there are other barriers that come into play, as Billy said, I think running events online and allowing people to connect from different countries, different time zones, does mean that you're potentially making your event and the findings of your research much more accessible. And I think linked to that are EDI issues, where previously somebody, say, from a lower middle income country to come to an event in Liverpool would have required several days, including things like putting, for example, childcare in place. If they're coming to our event online and the event only lasts a couple of hours, we're making it much more accessible for those sorts of people for whom it's really difficult to put all the different steps in place for international travel. So I think there's an EDI issue there, which is, which it doesn't solve all the problems, but if we can think carefully about how we do online events to ensure we're able to give people more opportunities for meaningful engagement, then I think that's another potential positive that we're seeing.
Because Helen, you had the University of Georgia Athens Symposia, and originally that was supposed to be like a small delegation that would travel out from Liverpool to Georgia Athens, but you had to move all of it online completely. Did that kind of change things? Did you, like in terms of participation and so on?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I can certainly echo Claire's point there about the number of people who can be involved in things. Normally a sort of delegation like that would be sort of half a dozen people would travel and maybe meet with 20 people when they got to Liverpool. But the event that we held in January, we had 250 people involved in 11 sessions. So the range and extent of involvement, is far greater. It would have cost, I don't know, £100,000 or so to do that if you were making people travel, plus the time as well. Taking a week out of people's diaries is just impossible. So we were very pleased about how that went. I think there are challenges in terms of the kind of the informal connectivity that you might get through a conference. It can be difficult to create that online, but I think if you can make use of the breakout rooms, and you can give quite a lot of thought beforehand into who you put into what rooms, so that you get people who are going to have something in common together. And that takes quite a bit of planning and quite a bit of talking to people to make sure you're sort of grouping people together in a way that's going to work. But it can be quite effective, and we've certainly seen people following up with the connections that they've made, emailing people who they've met online through that conference, so that there still are opportunities for people to meet new people and connect.
So talk to us a little bit about the work you've done with Wikipedia in particular. So my understanding is that you're trying to raise the profile of colleagues, like female colleagues or LGBTQ colleagues or BAME colleagues, by updating Wikipedia and kind of adding their profiles to that platform. Why are you specifically using that mode, and how what kind of impact are you having?
Yeah, so I should start off by saying they're not colleagues. You're not allowed to write about people you know on Wikipedia, so you can't know them, be related to them, or be paid by them.
Sure.
Because that could influence how you write.
That makes sense.
It's a completely neutral form and tone you have to take. So I think Wikipedia is phenomenally important. I learned about how to edit it a couple of years ago, and obviously all of us use it in our everyday lives. and it is used so much more than I'd really appreciated. So by journalists, by people in the media who are putting together experts for particular topics.
And also, I guess, I was exactly going to say, my kids use Wikipedia all the time.
Yeah, and massively in classrooms. You know, in science, in universities, in political campaigning, it's used. So Wikipedia is a very important platform, not only in what we see and how we use it directly, but also in the indirect ways. So it tells all the information to Home Assistant, so Siri and Amazon Alexa and all of those. If you have those in your houses and you ask a question of them, they go to Wikipedia for the information. So it's really important in how we access information now, and it's obviously phenomenally successful in giving open access, providing knowledge to people all over the world for free, and really, really respectable and credited knowledge. You know, you can't put a fact on Wikipedia without having a really, really credible reference to back whatever you're saying up. And so I think it's incredibly powerful. The problem with Wikipedia is the majority of editors are from a particular group. About 90% of them are men, and about half of those live in North America.
Right.
And they're pretty much all white. So we have a really biased view of the world and of the people who've contributed to making our world the way that it is today. And as a result of that, on English-speaking Wikipedia, about 18%, so just less than 1 in 5 of the biographies are about women. And that means when your kids are on it, when we're on it in university lecture theatres, when journalists are using it, they're getting a really skewed view of who's done what in the world and who does what in the world. And the reason I think it's so important to edit and to improve the representation of women and people of colour and LGBTQ plus scientists is because I really like the idea that someone's just on there because they're doing their homework, looking up climate change or looking up, you know, coronavirus, and then they're clicking through all the different links on it, and then they find their way to the profile of a woman or a black engineer or something like that. Like, you don't go to them and shove it in their face and make it really non-subtle. They're finding information kind of stealthily. They're finding it because they're interested in a topic. And hey, here's a woman who grew up in a similar part of Liverpool who's really interested in climate change. You know, you find out about it because they're interested in what you're interested in. It feels a lot more natural and honest to me than here's a book of 50 women scientists, find the one that looks most like you and impresses you most. I love the idea that you're fascinated by learning and information, and then you find it like that.
Lovely. And do you get to see any of the metrics in terms of the pages that you've edited? Can you see exactly what you're describing there, the click-throughs and people accessing that information?
So if people are interested who are listening in editing Wikipedia, either on the contributing content side or on the data analysis side, you get all the data from Wikipedia completely for free. It's probably nothing like any other platform you've ever put information onto. So you can find out who's looking at your pages, when they're looking at them, how often they've been looked at over an hour, over a day, over a week. You can see when people have particular studies coming out, or they've published a book, or they've appeared on the radio, how many more times people are talking about that page. You can start to see how it's linked from different parts of Wikipedia. So just as you said, the really interesting thing with Wikipedia is no one really starts off and goes directly to the page, particularly pages about people. They'll start on the page about something else. They'll start on the Wikipedia page about philosophy and then jump, they'll click a link and they'll get into this half an hour of just learning great facts. And I love that. And you can get all of that information. You can also be able to track everything you've done. So you really get a nice history of what you've contributed. And I guess from my kind of cynicism of how we really badly spend money on outreach and engagement, Wikipedia is completely free to edit, and it's free to edit in 300 different languages and accessed by 32 million people a day. So if you put stuff on Wikipedia, people really, really read it. And I think it's just a phenomenal tool for science communication or engagement, or in trying to remedy this underrepresentation of women scientists and on the general internet and elsewhere.